The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It's a constant companion and a source of warmth, golden light. Except that in Elden Ring, literally nothing I just said is true. Like the stargazers of old, our eyes are drawn to the sky, but the more we observe, the more oddities we'll find. And yet, there is a clear current of intent within those mysterious heavens. So let us ponder our orbs to see if we can find the invisible pull. In the process of creating my last few videos, I spent a lot of time staring at the sun. I discussed the metaphysical significance of sunrise and sunset, and the differences between the base game and the DLC in these videos. But while recording, I started noticing details about the heavens that I did not expect. So for once, I'm not going to focus on conclusions, but share with you all my observations, and explain what's so strange about them. We'll see why the behavior of Elden Ring's sun is so uncanny, and how we can tell that it's intentional. Finally, I will go out on a limb and give my own speculation, but this is a topic that I'm curious to hear other takes on as well. This will get pretty detailed, and by halfway through this video, you are likely to think that I am overthinking things or being too literal. But I promise that if you follow me through this thought process, we will find some interesting, if mysterious, storytelling within Elden Ring that I've never heard anyone else talk about. Besides, here in LoreTube, we pride ourselves on taking things too seriously. That's what makes it fun. So, without further ado. As I noted in my duality video, the sun has a very subtle presence in Elden Ring, and many players wonder if there even is a sun in the sky. I've seen other creators, and even commenters on my own videos, claim that there is no sun in the game, and I think that speaks to just how easy it is to miss. So for those who have missed it, there is, indeed, a sun in Elden Ring, an orb that rises in the morning and sets in the evening. That said, it's not visible from many locations in the base game because of cloud cover or terrain that blocks your view. The single best place to view it, I have found, is near the Church of the Bud in the DLC, but you can also see it from Liurnia or Limgrave when the sky is clear. In fact, here is a view of the sun from the First Step side of Grace. If you catch it in the morning, the sun is rising to your right when you first emerge above ground at the very beginning of the game. And there it is. That pale, dim little dot in the sky is the sun. Here it is from Fort Height. It doesn't always look this small, but it's easy to see why so many players fail to notice it when everything else in your field of view is bigger and more exciting. For comparison, here is another shot of the sun from Limgrave as it sets. This is along the southwestern coast, and it appears much larger than it does when rising over Limgrave. I'll discuss the size of the sun more later, but for now just note that the apparent size or brightness of the sun varies pretty dramatically based on where you're viewing it from and when. The main point for now is that you can check everything I'm about to say for yourself by finding some good sun-gazing spots. In the base game, I recommend Fort Height or the Dragon Communion Church in Limgrave. Or from Liurnia, I'd recommend Northern Liurnia Lakeshore, or the lake-facing cliffs right after Castle Stormvale. You may need to reload the area if it's overcast or rainy, and note that even if you get a good shot, it may start raining in the midst of your observations. In the DLC, the best place to see the sun is from Rao, and specifically the Church of the Bud. But if you want dramatic shots through the clouds, the top of the suppressing pillar is pretty great. Also note that I'm not using any mods. In fact, I'm playing on a PlayStation. The downside is that I can't get any of those fancy free camera shots for my videos. I also can't just turn the clouds off to get a clear sky. The upside is that you can trust that anything I capture in a video can be seen in normal gameplay, and is therefore more likely to be something that the developers intended us to be able to see. So with all that established, time for things to get weird. So the first big observation to make about Elden Ring's sun is that it doesn't actually rise in the east and set in the west, exactly. It rises in the northeast, moves directly overhead at noon, and then sets in the southwest. Now, the fact that it rises in the northeast isn't all that strange. In our world, the sun's exact rising and setting position will vary depending on the time of year and which hemisphere you're in. In the northern hemisphere, the sun's path will tilt towards the south, and from the southern hemisphere it will appear to tilt to the north. Notably, Elden Ring's stars also appear to move on a similar path, as one commenter brought to my attention. The stars move very slowly, but if I time-lapse footage like this, then it becomes more obvious that the stars also move from northeast to southwest, like the sun does. So the stars and sun all move in the same direction, and the moon is the only outlier, as it's always hovering just barely north of due east. That same commenter concluded that the lands between are on a rotating sphere like our own world, and are located in the southern hemisphere, thus seeing the sun rise in the northeast. This all made sense to me at first, but then I kept thinking about it, and there's a problem. See, in our world, if the sun rises in the northeast, it will always set in the northwest. To explain this, let's back up and talk about our own world for a second. The sun appears to rise and set in the sky because our planet is rotating along an axis. Controversial, I know, but let's keep going. The sun's motion is effectively drawing a giant circle in the sky, a circle whose position and diameter depend on the angle between our position on the Earth and the sun relative to the Earth's axis of rotation. We usually only see part of this circle in the sky, because the rest is being obscured by, the planet that we're on, so it looks like a giant arc in the sky. If you're on the equator, on an equinox, the sun is directly aligned with the Earth's rotation, and you will observe the sun rise due east, move directly overhead, and set due west. That's as wide as the circular path of the sun can possibly be. Lovely. Now, if you're significantly north or south of the equator, the sun won't ever move to be perfectly overhead. It will rise to a high point that varies with the season. When it's summer in your hemisphere, the sun will rise higher in the sky because the tilt of the Earth's axis is leaning toward the sun, and this effect gets exaggerated the further you are from the equator. In Arctic summers, the sun won't set at all. Instead, that full circular motion will be visible in the sky. This is sometimes referred to as the midnight sun. The point is that as you move further from the equator, you'll tilt the path of the sun to be further north or south, both when it rises and when it sets. However, there is no possible position on our planet from which you could see the sun rise in the northeast and set in the southwest. That would cross the axis of rotation, and since the rotation is what's causing the motion in the first place, it's impossible. So by the rules of our own world, this sun's motion could never happen. Of course, Elden Ring isn't taking place in our world. It's taking place in a fantasy world, so we don't know for a fact that the lands between are on a spherical planet, or that the motion of the sun is caused by the rotation of that planet. In fact, there's a reason to doubt this rotating sphere model, which we already mentioned, the slow movement of the stars. We mentioned that the stars move in approximate alignment with the sun, northeast to southwest, and at first, that seems to correspond to a rotating sphere, making all heavenly bodies move in the same direction. However, if the motion of the sun and stars were caused by rotation of the lands between, then they would move at approximately the same speed across the sky as they do in our world. But here are two clips sped up at the same rate. The speed of motion isn't even close. From our observations so far, we can conclude that at least one of our fundamental assumptions about the movement of celestial bodies must work differently in Elden Ring. Perhaps this is a geocentric world after all, and the sun and stars are both revolving around the lands between, following a direction set by the primeval current. However, even in a fantasy setting, the cardinal directions must mean something. Let's suppose for a second that the lands between are on a flat world that has a sun orbiting around it. There is no rotation to be the cause of anything. Well, in that case, you would assume that the cardinal directions would be defined by the motion of heavenly bodies. So whatever direction the sun rises in, we'd call east as a starting point. Now, some of you might be thinking that cardinality could instead be defined by magnetic north, and if so, that the path of the sun could be explained by a difference between magnetic and geographic north. However, in any pre-modern society, magnetic north is a dramatically less intuitive and less common concept than the direction the sun rises in. The point is that across cultures, it is historically the motion of the sun that is the basis for defining cardinal directions. Elden Ring does give us very clear cardinal directions, both on the map and on an ever-present compass, but they don't match the motion of the sun or the stars. The motion of the heavens being askew from this natural definition of cardinality may suggest that this direction of movement changed at some point. And indeed, we do have a way of glimpsing into the past by going to Far Missoula. This location is effectively a snapshot from the ancient past, and while the exact nature of this time-twisting storm is unclear, there is some sense in which time doesn't move forward here. And sure enough, while here we can see a blinding source of light eternally rising, due east. Interestingly, we can also see the Erd Tree burning due west, almost as a surrogate source of red light, where we would expect the sun to set. In fact, that leads us back to a strange feature of the moon. There are actually two moons in Elden Ring, but the one that is visible most of the time, from most places, is almost due east, and it is in a crescent phase. As I made a big deal about in my duality episode, the light of the moon is a reflection, which means that this moon is implying a light source just outside of our view, which is exactly east. So the moon doesn't reflect the light from the sun orb we see in the sky. It reflects the light of something else beyond the horizon. Spooky. For those who are curious, the second moon, which is normally only visible from the area of the Moonlight Altar where Ranni's questline ends, is due north. I'm not sure what to make of that, but it's worth a mention. Anyway, let's get even weirder. As I already noted, Elden Ring's sun can appear to vary pretty dramatically in size. In the real world, the sun's apparent size will also vary with our distance to it, which changes because our planet is on an elliptical path around it. However, this difference is at most about 4%, essentially imperceptible to the human eye. In fact, it's a noteworthy coincidence in our world that the sun's apparent diameter closely matches that of the moon, which are both about 30 arc minutes in diameter. And yes, I do feel very fancy saying arc minutes. What a great word. Anyway, this is why eclipses in our world look so dramatic. The moon can almost perfectly occlude the sun. Needless to say, this is not what it would look like if the moon moved in front of the sun in Elden Ring. Now, when I first started my observations, it appeared that the sun was actually growing larger throughout the day. Viewed from Limgrave, the sun is usually tiny when it first rises in the distance, and several times larger when it sets. However, I tested this extensively, and it seems that the actual disk of the sun is the same diameter no matter where you view it from. The problem is that it's almost always obscured by clouds, fog, or some other weather condition. If you get very lucky, however, you can occasionally see a perfectly clear sky in Limgrave or Liurnia and see the full orb. By contrast, you will never see a clear sky, and therefore never see the sun, in Caelid, Altus Plateau, or Mount Gelmir, at least as far as I've seen. Even when the sky is perfectly clear, however, the brightness of the sun still varies depending on your location. In our world, the sun is so bright that you will actually damage your eyes by looking directly at it, so please don't do that. In the base game, this blindingly bright light is only visible in Far Missoula, even though the source of light seems to be obscured by clouds. Meanwhile, in Limgrave or Liurnia, the sun is dull by comparison, even under perfect conditions. Similarly, in the realm of shadow, the actual orb of the sun is hard to find from many locations, as much of the map is perpetually overcast, with the exception of the ruins of Rao. Here, the sky is always clear, and the sun is dramatically brighter than it is anywhere in the lands between, enough to be almost blinding when we look straight at it. This is particularly strange, given that the realm of shadow is under some kind of veil. We should expect that if sunlight has to go through a veil to reach this place, it would be dimmer than in the lands between. But the realm of shadow's sun is brighter. Both sunrise and sunset are more vibrantly colored. This is why I kept coming to the realm of shadow for good shots of the sun, and why I started noticing some of these patterns. Before trying to reach any conclusions, there's one even stranger locale to note: the mountaintops of the giants. The mountains are tall enough to be above the clouds, and thus this region always has a clear sky. We can see the moon and the stars clearly, and yet the orb of the sun never appears. Why? Consider another interesting connection here. The noble gold mask has a mask that is either meant to represent a sunflower or the sun itself. Either way, the sun is somehow connected to the truth he is seeking out, and his quest leads him to the mountaintops of the giants. It is here, where the pale orb of the sun never rises, that he has his final revelation before the end of his questline. What truth did he come to understand while standing underneath a sunless sky? Why doesn't the sun appear here? While the mechanism involved is unclear, the total effect has an obvious pattern. The sun only appears, rising in the northeast portion of the sky, when you are southwest of whichever holy tree overlooks the land. In the lands between, you can only see the orb of the sun from Limgrave or Liurnia. In the realm of shadow, the sun is most visible from the ruins of Rao, which means that the sun will generally appear to rise directly behind the shadow tree, and then move overhead toward the Tower of Enir Lim. Narratively, the meaning of all this is wide open to interpretation, but in terms of visual storytelling, the game is drawing our attention to something. I don't think it's a coincidence that the sun rises askew from its traditional orientation, that its movement across the sky is impossible, or that it's invisible from the mountaintops. These are all details that had to be manually coded into the game. It would have been much simpler to have a sun that rises in the east and is visible from anywhere when the sky is clear. So, was the planet we're on pulled off of its axis of rotation? Does the sun just hate the fire giants and refuse to shine for them? Is the orb in the sky an imposter sun? Something fantastical is true about the nature of the sun, but there's no way to know for sure what it is. But I'm not going to end the video here. You all have encouraged me to go out on limbs, so I'll let you know what's on my mind, acknowledging that it is wild speculation. As I observe all these details, I can't help asking myself, what if that thing isn't the sun? I mean, no NPCs ever seem to acknowledge it, or treat it like the divine celestial body the sun is in our world. Most references to the sun in item descriptions only talk about it being faded or drained of color. We know that the source of golden light in the lands between isn't this pale orb, it's the Erd tree. So now consider that we know of a golden star which fell from the heavens down to the lands between long ago. A golden star is a fairly literal description of the sun. Now that same entity, the Elden beast, is inside of the Erd tree and is the source of the golden light emanating from it across the lands between. Sunflowers, which famously track the sun with their faces, all face the Erd tree, as though to tell us where to find the sun. Consider also that at the moment of Marika's ascension, we can see sunlight through the divine gate, and a force that almost seems to be pulling whatever is on the other side toward Marika. So, what if the Erd tree isn't just metaphorically eclipsing the role of the sun, but quite literally contains the sun's light? What if the golden star bearing the Elden beast was the sun itself? And this sun, or at least its golden aspect, fell to the earth? Well, if so, then what is the pale orb? It could be the remnants of a sun that has lost its golden aspect. Or it could be more like a memory, manifested by the Erd tree. We see manifested memories across the lands between, including the memories of seemingly inanimate objects, such as great banners outside of Leyndell. The orb in the sky may simply be the Elden beast remembering when it was a star. This might explain why it doesn't appear over the mountaintops, since those lands are forsaken by the Erd tree. In turn, this would imply that the Realm of Shadows sun is a manifestation of the Shadow tree. Tarnished Archaeologist has a fabulous episode where he examines the Divine Towers, and one of his most notable observations is that the Divine Towers all have rock formations on their side that appear to have once been liquid rock, which cooled on the side of the tower. Some evocative footage from the Night Rain network test may suggest a different source for this rock layer, but either way, the presence of this layer on both the Divine Towers and the Forge of the Giants matches plenty of other evidence of a cataclysmic event in the deep history of the lands between. The sun falling down upon the lands between is exactly the kind of event that could result in such a cataclysm. If so, then it's understandable why the moment when the sun became drained of color would inspire a dreadful awe in anyone who witnessed it. What's more, this would give a whole new context to the Flame of Frenzy ending, where the contents of the Erd tree are being sent back up into the sky.
But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned.
So yeah, probably a stretch. But it's an image that, once you've considered it, may haunt the back of your mind when you next explore the lands between and notice the mysterious pale orb overhead. Think about it. And in the meantime, thank you for watching. Please do the engagement things, and expect to hear more limb theories in the future. I'm also making progress on the next episode of the Grand Unified Theory, and trust me, when it's ready, that will be an episode you will not want to miss. Until then.